Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Sprague from Persimmon Health. I am a serial entrepreneur working on healthcare technology that helps more people access better quality of care. This podcast is for the movement of innovators, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and thought leaders that are advancing the American healthcare system through digital health. In this podcast, we highlight real stories of innovators and enablers of digital health, their opportunities, challenges, and learnings for innovation. We'll cover topics such as startup building and fundraising, entrepreneurship, emerging technologies, and big ideas to transform healthcare. We invite you to participate in this community, share your stories, and accelerate the movement. Thank you. We have an awesome pod. Enjoy.
Tariq is a physician entrepreneur and a serial healthcare innovator, both inside and outside of health systems. He's a pediatrician turned entrepreneur and leader within Kaiser Permanente, quality officer, startup entrepreneur and advisor, and also exploring the world of institutional investments with angels and VCs. That's a long way of saying he's seen, evaluated, and done digital health innovation from just about every angle. He has a lot to share about his journey, learnings, and advice for digital health entrepreneurs. Tariq, welcome to the pod. We got to know each other last year when I was curious about physician entrepreneurs and their motivations and needs for help. And we had a conversation that really inspired me to know people like you exist, are successful and motivated by all the right reasons. So Tariq, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of the things I do, but I'm originally a pediatrician by trade and a hospital doctor. I've had lots of experience in healthcare systems. I worked at Kaiser Permanente for 15 years as not only a clinical physician doing frontline work, but as a physician leader. And then I started dabbling in solving problems. I started becoming a quality improvement specialist, a safety expert, and some of the problems I solved happened to involve innovation and technology. And then I found myself becoming what we call an entrepreneur, and we can talk about that in a moment, but really using technology to help solve problems and help drive a lot of the work we're doing. And it really kind of inspired me and kicked off my passion to pursue that more. So I ended up moving to Lexington, Kentucky, and joining University of Kentucky, where I'm the chief quality officer and a vice chair for quality and safety here, and also joined startups as an entrepreneur. And I started advising both formally and informally various startups, and really exploring the world of venture capital and industrial and institutional investing. So it's been a great journey, and I'm learning every day, and I've making mistakes and failing, and then iterating and moving on, and it's just been an amazing journey. And I'm even more passionate about the digital health space and the future that can come with really getting healthcare plugged in the right way into digital technology.
Right, and you have a fascinating journey, and I'd love to unpack that a bit. So doctor to entrepreneur, then medical officer to startup advisor. Now looking at investing roles. What inspired you along that journey, moving from one role to the other, and what did you do in those roles?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think as I was thinking about this, it's not really discretely moving from one thing to the other. It's kind of a continuum, just kind of a blend as I go through my journey. I'm starting to morph and evolve into different things as I pass through, and I don't completely leave anything behind. I just kind of like add it to the evolution of the things that I'm doing. And so I think, I think the thing that's really inspired me to kind of jump in and do all this work was that I really thought of myself as a problem solver. And initially as a clinician, as a physician, I wanted to like fix hard problems. And I would look at things that were not working in our system, and they were driving human error, and it was the only solution was someone just had to work harder and faster, and they could never be tired. They can never be subject to like the stressors of the environment. And I was like, wow, this needs a systemic thing. a systemic change, a protocol, a way that we all do things together. Some of that involves technology and some of it doesn't, And so eventually at one point I was trying to solve different problems with the EMR, and helping work on asthma care or sepsis, in pediatric patients. And then one day, I happened to be a transport physician. So we would go help transport sick kids from an outside ER where they didn't have pediatric services to a pediatric ICU within the Kaiser system that had more services for really, really sick kids. And there was basically no situational awareness in the ambulance. They did everything on paper, and the rest of our ecosystem worked in a digital world. So I said, it can't be that hard to make the ambulance part of the ecosystem. And so I basically went and worked hard and got a grant and, learned how to pitch and got money and helped design a system to put the EMR in ambulances so that our teams that were taking care of the sickest patients in a box traveling 70 miles an hour, in the middle of nowhere in California, could have, access to the tools of the electronic medical record, or know what someone's drug allergies were, or know how to dose medications, could see the information that was happening. And then people could look into their ambulance and see what was going on. And you could, when you were on your way to pick up a sick kid, you could know what was happening in that other Kaiser ER, and react. And, in that whole journey and getting that operationalized, that was like my first entrepreneurial startup. And that word means basically I'm doing entrepreneur-like activities, but I'm working in a company. I haven't left, but I had to pitch it. I had to build stakeholders. I had to engage everyone. I had to get the grant funding. I had to sit down with the engineers. I don't code, so I sat with them in our corporate offices, basically programming the different tools, went back to the nurses and staff and figured out how to design it right using human-centered design principles. And I rode in those ambulances too, and I worked with them. And I knew if I created a product that didn't help them take better care of kids, that I was failing, right? And so under those basics of that journey really inspired me to want to do it forever. And I knew at some point, I think it was in 2012, that I wanted to do this at some point, I wanted to become a person that did digital health. And I didn't know how I would get there, but I was like, I got to do this, right?
You had the goal.
And so that's kind of what inspired me.
Gosh, yeah, I love that. Yeah, and gosh, in retrospect, now that I know more about that product, it seems so obvious, but it's only obvious when you're on that front line experiencing the problems. And I love that you're saying it's about solving problems for people. And I've always internally hypothesized that physicians should be some of the best healthcare innovators because they understand problems so intimately from so many important angles. So a front row seat and ear to the patient's problems, but also that boots on the ground reality of the physician's challenges and challenges inherent in the U.S. healthcare system. And so much about digital health innovation today has to solve the patient's problems while working within those realities and constraints. So I guess a follow-up question is, do you feel like being a physician has given you an advantage in being a digital health entrepreneur?
I mean, that's a great question. I'd say almost yes and no. And the reason I would say yes to that is because it helps you, like in this particular example, it helps me think about dynamic problems. And I've basically spent my entire career, maybe it's a clinical focus, or maybe it's, as I become a physician administrator, I'm working on solving operational or staffing problems, or how do I get my team to be inspired to do the work when they're tired? And, like solving all these different problems, I think is part and parcel to being an entrepreneur. It helps you think about things, and I've always been a problem solver that kind of tries to turn, yes, I hate the think outside the box phrase. I think it's overused, but try to look at a problem from different perspectives. And most importantly, try to look at it from the perspective that you don't have, like the perspective of another frontline person or the patient or a caregiver. That is vitally important. And I think it does fuel you, like having to look at the world in different ways can fuel you to help solve problems better. The drawback for physicians is that I think that we become entrenched. We tend to become entrenched in our own beliefs, on our own data, and our own evidence. And because we have a belief that we're trying to use the scientific method to vet everything, to validate every single thing, to look at the randomized controlled trial. And then when that's done, okay, now we're going to use it. And 10 years later, when all that is done, you vetted your solution, and but then we're really bad at implementing as well, and converting from that as that evidence evolves and comes out to start using it and becoming early adopters and then an early majority and moving up the diffusion of innovation curve. We're not great at that. So it's yes and no. And I've had to change my thinking to be one where I realize the value of other stakeholders and other people in the process. You have to really understand and break down the process and think about it from someone else's viewpoint besides your own. Being a physician and living that can give you that viewpoint, but you really have to work harder after you develop that initial thesis, or the hypothesis, and make sure that it works for everyone else. And I think that's sometimes the hard work that physicians may not think about. So it can make your job harder, and you have to kind of get out of that mindset a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because of course in pure startup world nowadays, lean startup is one of the main pedagogies they can follow, which is essentially just the scientific method, right? Build, measure, learn, come up with a hypothesis, figure out what you can build to test that particular thing, and then see if you actually made an improvement. So it borrows very much from that scientific method, but in the pure startup world, you're iterating so quickly on such few variables, whereas in the clinical world, things take time to really actually prove out. So even though the loop may be similar, the speed of the loop or the comprehensiveness of the loop is going to be different.
I totally agree. And that's what in healthcare innovation, I think when you talk to investors or people that are looking at other industries, the life cycles of development of these products are so much longer. And that makes it really hard as an investor when I step in, as I now have friends that are VCs and I talk with them and kind of get their viewpoint of like when they're trying to help a company and help a good idea move forward, they take a lot of risk, right? And it's interesting to look at it from their viewpoint of how am I going to take a risk on you when it's put this money in and then 6 years later, maybe I'll start to get evidence, or I won't know for a very long time whether this is panning out. I think the traditional, institutional investing world is stressed by that, because it's a totally different beast. I think there's some approaches that are coming out that are newer, but that traditional model, I think, can run risk to cause issues, and and I think that's evolving as we speak, and we've seen some instances where when you don't do extreme due diligence or use some technique to really make sure that the process is moving along in the right direction, that you can run into trouble, think of Theranos and even there's a lot coming out about Cerebral right now and some of the things that have happened there. And it's due diligence is very important. And there was the one other point I wanted to make really quickly is that, clinicians are often researchers. There's another rapidly evolving science called quality improvement science, which I happen to be a quality improvement geek in my roles to change things. And that is a little bit more of a nimble science, and it's a little bit of a dirty research. And I think it's very akin to innovation. So as I learned that in my quality and safety roles at institutions and in doing performance improvement or using the Toyota method and lean methodologies to make systems better, I think that fits very well with innovation. So I feel very connected to that because it allows you to iterate really quickly. You have all these real world environmental factors happening and you just pivot. And in quality improvement, when you pivot, you basically just track what you changed and you try to move on. And so it's not like having a randomized controlled trial where you have these controlled variables and then you just let it run for 5 years. You're constantly adapting, constantly moving, and you're tracking your data in a different way. You're using something called time ordered data or statistical process control, where you basically see what that run chart does over time. And then if you want to do something and then your data gets worse, then you stop. You do something, you change again and watch it go up, right? So you're reacting in real time. And I think that's where there's a nexus between a real similarity between innovation and entrepreneurship and quality improvement. So those two things that I think I've gravitated toward, just maybe my personality or the way I do things, seem to really connect. And I think that's a very interesting place for innovators to be, instead of thinking about, I think randomized controlled trials are important because they tell you, okay, this method, this piece of intervention works for this thing or this medicine works, but it doesn't tell you how people apply them in the real world. And do they take that medication that, performs so well? And, are they taking their steps? Are they doing exercise? Or how are they doing psychologically going through a process? You have to kind of see those things every day in real time. And I think that the innovation, if it's going to move faster, needs to think like that. And quality improvement scientists that are starting to emerge in healthcare, such as myself, I think are really well adapted to connecting to that mission.
No, I love learning about this, because both lean startup and these lean methodologies within healthcare, they have the same origin, which is that Toyota manufacturing and what you need to do to make incremental improvements along an assembly line or a process. But what I've gathered is that quality within a health system can mean something different than the types of variables that people iterate on, let's say in a consumer-driven startup. Would you mind expanding on, like, what does quality improvement mean when you're trying to do it systematically and iteratively rather than in extensive trial?
Yeah, quality improvement, what it means is you can target anything, any process that exists. And you basically set what we call a SMART goal, where you think about some goal that is attainable, it's very specific, it's time bound, like you're going to achieve something in 6 months or 3 months or 18 months. It's something that you can actually accomplish. Like, you're not going to change the world. We're going to go from 50% success rate to 100% success rate. That might be really challenging to do, right? So you may say, hey, in 6 months, we want to improve 10 to 15%. We want to make something 10 to 15% more efficient or more accurate. As you're going for smaller chunks of goals, and then you're setting up the parameters, your hypothesis that you think is going to get you there. And there may be certain processes in whatever system you have that can help get you there. If you think about digital technology, they may be like, hey, if we bring in a chatbot or an assistant virtual agent, we're going to streamline the process of making appointments, right? And that's a big, huge pain point. That's why people just don't show up to appointments, because they're on the phone for 20 minutes, right? You can bring in a technology, you identify it as a pain point. You ask the customers, you ask the people in the system. It's like, hey, here's our system. There's points that are broken. We're going to target interventions on those broken parts of the system. And then you basically try to get some improvement. You put out your intervention, you measure it over time, you try to shorten the time so you're not doing it forever, and then you see what happens. And if you're going in the wrong direction after, several cycles of measurement, whether that's days, weeks, or months, and you're not doing the right thing, you turn. You pivot, right?
Yeah.
And you try a new intervention, or you come up with a new hypothesis that says, wait, the intelligent virtual agent didn't work. What's wrong about that? Working. It's like, oh, it's not asking the right questions, or the natural language processing that is built into it doesn't understand a Southern dialect or something. There are these different things that can, just for example. And so you make modifications, and you're basically tinkering and tweaking your experiment along the way instead of letting it run its completion, right? And so that is like innovation when you're developing a product, right?
Gosh, yeah, it is so much, and I'm happy to learn about this, because of course, the healthcare sector gets dinged for being slow at innovation, but I think it's because innovation really depends on that feedback loop in order to know what to do next. And so many innovations are more incremental rather than all at once. So unless you have that feedback loop, you're not going to go anywhere very quickly. You're going to go as fast as the feedback loop is. So happy to learn that people like you are really trying to get it right for healthcare, because it is more nuanced than, let's say, a consumer startup that just wants more people to click the buy button or the refer a friend button. There's much more on the line. There's people that need to be trained. But it sounds like there is this middle ground where you can structure your experiments in a way where, no, it's not going to be as fast as A/B testing on 1 million users and figuring out what works best. But there will be more rigor, but it'll still be much faster than letting, as you said, things run to their completion. So I'm sure there's a lot of learnings that you've had as far as the intersections of entrepreneurship, and being a physician. But I'm curious, when you first transitioned to being an entrepreneur from being a doctor, could you walk us through that learning curve, those challenges or those kind of transferable skills as a doctor when you started taking those on?
Yeah, no, I've been thinking a lot about that in the last couple of days, and like what that like what I was when I did my first project that started in like 2009 versus what I am today. And after going through like executive leadership training and learning how to, communicate better. And it's just amazing. The biggest thing when I started was that I started with a great idea. I was very much in, like, I'll bring up the ambulance example again. I was, I thought of the idea in the shower one day. I'm like, hey, why are we not doing things differently? And I pitched it to some of my colleagues and nurses and physicians. They're like, that would be a great idea. But what I didn't realize was I didn't know how to pitch. I did not know how to concisely deliver a quick message that that demonstrated return on investment and thought about the principles of business and what kind of solutions, what kind of results are you aiming to attain? I didn't think about that, and I started out kind of like just sending out big emails to people that I thought were leaders, and it was. I remember I constructed this very eloquent, what I thought was eloquent, 3-page email trying to explain why I was doing things, and like nobody probably. And one of my leaders, Diane Craig, she was a great leader and mentor of mine at Kaiser Permanente. Was kind of like, you can't sell something like an idea like this. And the real point for me where it pivoted was running to the right mentor, and I ran into someone named Yan Chow, who at that time was a physician innovator and a pediatrician at KP, and he's since gone on to do a bunch of great things, and I think he's at Automation Everywhere right now, and just been connected to a lot of different companies. But he sat there and patiently listened to me and understood that I had a great idea, but even though I wasn't communicating it well, and got me connected to an innovation team internally at Kaiser Permanente that started to help mold my thinking and try to teach me how to pitch and do, so I got connected to people and had mentors that saw some value, and then they helped me along the way refine the process, because as a pediatric physician, at least, I just wasn't good at being concise, wasn't good at delivering the message, and that was the biggest thing I had to learn is how to convey the idea concisely, be to the point, and say, here's the value I'm going to deliver you.
Right.
And so that was the biggest learning and the biggest initial hurdle I went through. The next one, as I started to evolve and I got funding, I got this first project done, and I was like, wow, that's great. Then figuring out how to scale. Then scaling was its own problem. It's like, people are like, oh, I don't want to do it here, or my environment's a little different, and that was challenging, getting that first product operationalized, but then I had trouble scaling it. And I kind of learned factors later on that would help me scale it. And then years later, when I was consulting for Southern California, Kaiser Permanente, which is a sister company, a different vertical within Kaiser Permanente. And they were starting a transport program, and they looked at Northern California and said, wow, you can move kids around your system. You have a virtual care system. You can consolidate your resources. And so helping them design their ambulance EHR was really, really important. And I was able to bring learnings to them and help them scale and develop it. But it took a lot to figure out how to communicate now your idea that succeeded to a whole new audience. You really have to step back and learn how to be inquisitive. You have to not kind of drive your idea saying, hey, here's my great idea, I'm going to push it down your throat. That kind of doesn't work with change management. So I really next started learning how to bring change management in, and how to convince people of ideas. And I think like learning the human behavior, the psychology of change has actually been a much more valuable tool than just being a creative thinker and coming up with this cool idea, and then, having understanding of like what machine learning is, or, what a chatbot is, or how to implement it. It's actually the other intangible things, about connecting with people and developing relationships and explaining ideas and driving them and being resilient. Like those were actually so much more important than just like, hey, I know how to, or, I don't know how to code, but you could say, I know Python, right? So I'm going to solve it's actually much more complicated than that. But I learned a lot of these things along the way, and I'm still learning, and I'm making mistakes, because when you make a mistake, you have to learn from it, and then do things differently next time. So I don't know if that was a long-winded. I don't know if I hit a
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with, they may have great ideas and they may have a great product in the end, but I think what a lot of people underestimate until they try to get something adopted by people is how hard it is, as you said, to get people to change what they're already doing. And so even if you have the better solution, there's such a high cost to asking people to do something differently, that you can underestimate that friction and the hurdles you're going to have to go through to get something adopted. So I think it's amazing that you had the opportunity to work through those challenges in an organization like Kaiser Permanente, or a connected set of companies.
Yeah, and sometimes part of the challenge is it's sometimes easier to design a solution for someone and customize it, although that's a different life cycle, because you can really tap into the problem they're trying to solve. Sometimes you're bringing a solution to a problem that they don't know they have yet, or maybe there's some nuance and they don't actually have that particular problem in the same way that your solution is designed to fit. So there becomes a lot of different other factors to consider too, as you're trying to market a product versus designing a customized product with like a technology base that will work, right?
Yeah, and there's got to be an art to that, because that is another challenge, that even if, let's say, as a healthcare entrepreneur, you happen to get one or two pilots and you have these co-development partners that are going to be telling you how to solve their flavor of the problem, and it is just fingers crossed that they're going to be really committed to that process, because it takes a lot of feedback and commitment of people going to try a thing and give you real guidance on how to make it better, or else it's not going to go anywhere. And you better hope, fingers crossed, that whatever you build with those first one or two pilots is going to apply to other people with the same problem. And if it doesn't, you're a little bit out of luck unless you somehow navigate to validating that up front.
Yeah, and it helps if you're going to be an entrepreneur and stay within a company. If the culture allows you to fail or make a mistake and then iteratively change and then improve that process, because it's often going to be the fact that you're not going to get it right the first time. And so that's why that old mantra of fail fast, and then the corollary fail cheaply, really plays a role. And in my second innovation grant at Kaiser, I helped design a chatbot that was supporting new moms in their journey, and did a lot of work around breastfeeding. There's some postpartum depression. There were a bunch of features for the baby. It could connect to a call center. And it took a long time to develop this product, because we kept loading it with all these features and said, okay, I want to solve this holistic problem within our scope. We were targeting babies being born to the first 3 months of life. And we spent so much time in development, and it was so long, and we used up so many of our resources. And then we fell across a leadership change in the area where we were going to pilot. That new leader wasn't really interested in coming up with a chatbot technology in 2017, 18, when now like these things are like ubiquitous post COVID. But at that time it was just kind of early, and people, it wasn't that interesting. So, I didn't follow the mantra of failing early, fail fast, and trying to take a minimum viable product, a smaller product with one feature, testing it, make sure the people, your customers, in this case, patients and new families that just had babies, like making sure they really like that. And then you spend the money to add the next phase on, test it, and then the next phase. Instead, I went like, okay, we did some prototyping and early stuff, and like, okay, we try to add 12 features or 15 or 20, and then try to roll it out. And that's a lesson that like I will take with me for the rest of my career, because we used a lot of our grant money, a lot of time, a lot of engineering resources, and probably should have stopped sooner and then tested, got more traction, and then started building the other parts in the roadmap or the vision, right? And so sometimes my grand roadmap, like I want to do this, and I want to get to here, you can do it in pieces and you can go more slowly. And when I was more impatient as a younger entrepreneur, innovator, whatever you want to call it, I said, I want this moonshot. right? Because that's
Right.
the only chance I'm going to get, because I may run out of credibility within this big organization, or and so taking things small and moving nimbly and fast, and then testing a lot and using a minimum viable product, even if it's not your entire vision of what you want to build out. That's a huge lesson that I would pass on to other entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, no matter if you're in a company or you're external to a company.
Right. Yeah, I like that. And do you find that large organizations that are invested in innovation, like for example, Kaiser Permanente, are they becoming more used to that type of more progressive investment? Right. So smaller blocks of, let's say, funding or buy-in to get to a certain point where, no, it may not be a complete solution, but you're going to know if you're on the right track. And then if you're on the right track, then we're going to go one step further and in kind of progressively supporting these types of internal innovations.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. At the time when I was there, I could see, yes and no. There was there was some evolution in that space. There actually was some backtracking depending. It's such a big organization, and there's so many different verticals within that organization. It was very complex, and there began to. It started with that mantra, and then there was like internal innovation grant funding, and then it kind of migrated to a phase of like, well, let's work with the big companies. Let's work with like Microsoft and the Googles and the and the big mega companies instead of the small early startups, because it's, you get things that are maybe baked, you're spending money on these things, and then you may not get a result. And I think some healthcare organizations aren't necessarily ready to take that on, right? So now, has that changed in the year and a half since I left? It may be migrating a little bit. And you can look at the development of Graphite Health, which Kaiser Permanente is participating in, which is kind of like an app store, or kind of like a collection of different innovative tools. And there, I think Intermountain Health has joined, and some other groups, but they're trying to look at that market mentality of, hey, let's see what other smaller companies out there are doing. So I think it varies. It goes up and down, and it depends on which particular, in a big company like KP, it depends on which particular vertical you're talking to. And I try to tell, like, when I'm kind of doing informal or formal advising or just talking to other people, I'm like, Kaiser, you want to come to a big company like Kaiser with ideas that are definitely, beyond your pre-seed or your seed stage. You want to get something a little bit, maybe into Series A. You want to get product, you want to get things working. You maybe have gone through an accelerator or an incubator first to really make sure you have a little bit of credibility. You've kind of tested some of your products. And you can find, in big corporations, you can find people that are willing, have a little bit more tolerance for ambiguity and tolerance for risk, and may be able to take you on. And different even payers now are doing that. Like, there's stuff coming out of Humana and, other groups. Cigna is developing and or acquiring different types of companies that are willing to take some risk. And that's these new innovative companies are kind of part of that. And I think just for healthcare to scale up, it's going to have to take a little bit more risk, or put out some of its budget for R&D, or be willing to try new things. The pandemic has just kind of accelerated, what has been obvious to someone like me for years, and a lot of us, is that virtual care is going to have to expand to, surpass some of the social determinants of health, or some of the access issues, that are just, plaguing healthcare. And we're going to just have to get better, and technology is not the only solution, but it's something that can augment people to expand their capabilities more.
Right. Gosh, I can tell you've learned so much. Your time as an entrepreneur, from the time you were a physician, just by the language you use and all of the different perspectives you've gained. Is there anything that doctors need to unlearn who want to take on the business side?
I think you, so one thing, physicians tend to have to be forced to learn continuously, because things are changing continuously. So I think if anyone comes into it with that mindset of like, I've learned everything I needed to know in med school and residency, and now I'm just going to continue, if someone has that, they're sorely mistaken just for being a physician. That's not the way the world works. You're learning more after you leave your formal education and training. You're learning more all the time. And so I think assuming people have that mindset, they need to apply that to things like system change and technology, and more physicians need to understand, the nuances of what machine learning is, and the mistakes, the positives that can happen from it, and then the really areas where you can fall down upon using technologies like that. And I think opening and being open to working with different stakeholders. And again, this is a quality improvement thing. I was teaching at University of Kentucky. I was teaching a lecture to new leaders coming up. It's here's how you manage change and what a PDSA cycle is, plan, do, study, act, and quality improvement, and some of the, and I basically telling people, you have to go learn the process completely. Talk to a bunch of different people. The answer's not in your head. If you think it is, unlearn that right now. Right. And I kind of joked, get over yourself. This is not about you, right? And I think that's the biggest thing for physicians to unlearn, or anyone that's in a leadership position, is you have to go down to where the work is and look at it, be empathetic, listen, learn, because that you're going to hear the answer, you're going to hear the solution there, or maybe the people that are in the front line are going to have the best idea because they're in it constantly, and so they're going to tell you what's wrong, right? So that's how you can kind of build. And I think that's the biggest thing. One of the biggest things to unlearn, and then understanding that there is a business to medicine, there's a business to healthcare, there's a business to innovation, and you're gonna be better off if you learn what the rules of that game are. If you want to succeed, I pushed that off for years, and I thought, this is, and I was that was part of my reason for wanting to stay as an entrepreneur, because an entrepreneur, you can stay in the company. I still can get paid my salary, and I have to do all my other things. You still end up working over 80 hours. I worked a lot because I did everything on the side, right? And I had to do my day job, and I was a division chief, and I was a director of a region at one point. I did all this stuff, right? And I did that entrepreneurial work on the side, but I knew it's okay, well, I know I got my grant funding. I know this is easy, and then I know I'm getting paid a salary. So it's okay, I'm fine. And I was avoiding learning the institutional part of the business, right? So when you go out there, the advantage is, as an entrepreneur, external, now you can be more nimble, and you don't necessarily have to react to all the processes that are laid out by your company, which can be a good thing, can allow some more flexibility. But now you have to learn the business world of, God, you have to go fund everything you're doing, and you can't just fill out several grant applications and get internal money anymore, or be kind of covered and have a buffer. So you have to learn that business world. And some of the best ways are basically talking to other investors or people that, that are VCs, getting involved in accelerators and incubators, reading about what venture capital is. I started doing that, and I'm like, what? This is how it works? And my brother-in-law was a VC, and I'm calling him, I'm like, it's wait, what's an LP? An LP has to bring you money, and I give you money, and then I make money later. But what, to join the club, I have to bring you $100,000. Really? That's how, understanding some of these things, and assuming it's can I go be a consultant for a VC firm? It's oh, well, it doesn't work that way. You actually pay in, and then you do that. And I'm like, what? But it's just interesting to learn some of these things. I think it's important to have eyes wide open about what that is, and what's an angel investor, and what, you have to learn that, and then start having conversations, and that's going to help you. I think, it certainly has helped me be more brave at entering the market of, externalizing and being an entrepreneur, and then learning about what you have to do and how the message is different. And then what we have to do for due diligence, which is actually really important. It's hey, did you actually estimate how your customers are going to grow? And it's what? Why don't we do that? And how much you would charge for each? I'm helping some of my friends in a nurse-led startup that's actually forming, and I got them in an accelerator. And I say, well, what are you going to charge each customer? How are you going to grow the product over time? How are you going to get into pilot studies? And they're just what? I just had this great idea. It's hey man, this is the thing. It's do you want to do this or not? Why do you want to do this? And they're well, I really believe this is going to help all nurses everywhere. Then this is the work. And
Right,
so,
right.
but it's nice to have people that you can have a conversation like that with that have learned. And I found people to help me in that journey, but it took a long time. And so I try to pay it forward when I'm interacting with people or people call me and try to tell them all that I've learned. And I'm still learning right now, right? But it's helping people to get started or set expectations. Or sometimes people are like, gosh, I don't really want to do that. And I'm like, that's the most important thing. Is like, know what this is. If you want to go on that big, hard journey, it's going to be less secure. You're going to make less, but you may be more fulfilled, And I was talking to one of my friends, Arup Berman, who's a great intensivist out of UCSF, and he formed a startup at a time when I was still doing the intrapreneurial thing, and working on my second product over at Kaiser, and he was in the Y Combinator, and I saw him. He was just like, oh man, it's like he was just so stressed out, by this. And now I see him later. I talked to him, like a month ago, and he's like, his company is really Omniscia Health. It's a great company doing education for nursing staff and
Awesome.
and doing a lot of stuff virtually. And they're growing. And I think I can't remember if they're Series A. I think they got their Series A and they're moving on toward B. It's just amazing stuff he's doing. And I was talking to him like, weren't you scared about the risk? And he's like, well, it's not the same. I could have made more as a doctor, but I'm more fulfilled. I've done something that brings more meaning. And I was like, I could just see.
Sounds like the name of the game. Yeah.
Yeah, I could just see in him. He was so relaxed. He was so like, this is the right thing that I need to do. And I was like, all right, giddy up, right? And so
I mean, in your journey to becoming an entrepreneur, from entrepreneurship, you became co-founder, a CMO at a startup. I'm just curious if you can synthesize, like, what are some of those learnings as an entrepreneur, or even some of the differences between entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship that you've really noticed?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things, and I kind of touched on this, is the way you deal with funding. And as an entrepreneur, you're basically don't have that company necessarily to fund you. Now, if you're looking at institutional money or angels or venture capitalists, you have to figure out how to really show the value you're going to deliver. You have to put out a business model. You have to do some things that I didn't have to do in Kaiser Permanente. I had to show like clinical value. What are my outcomes going to change when I get this product? What's the benefit for the workforce or for the patients, right? So you had to do that, but you have to do another thing in entrepreneurship is you have to explain to people that you're asking for money, right? It's like, how is this going to financially also make sense for me? What's the return on investment that you're going to have? Am I going to have a 3x return, or am I going to like break even over 10 years? And why should I give you, $200,000 or whatever it is to do, And so that's an eye-opening process. That is something to understand. If you're going to become an entrepreneur and leave the safety of the nest, you really like learn about that process. Also understand there's other funding sources, like, there's like grants like NIH, small business innovation grants are a great thing. Robert Wood Johnson grants. There's all kinds of grants available to fund what you're doing that doesn't have to be investor money. And because anytime you invest, of course, you're giving away a piece of the company or a piece of your equity. Right? And then, some people are self-funded. They just, they built up that big nest egg, or if you have a rich uncle, great, that will fund you to get out the door. It's great. It just, there's pros and cons for each of these things. So I think that's one of the biggest things to understand, about the business component of intrapreneur versus entrepreneur. I think the other challenge, can be is that when you're an entrepreneur, you're in the company, you're embedded, you're really tied up in the front lines. And so it was really easy for me to follow one of my principles as a leader and a product designer, is to like think about human-centered designs, like go there and talk to the people that are doing, when I was building a baby app, I was rounding the nursery, and so I would like sit there and be like talking to families and be like, so what about this is really killing you, right? About the process and like the way breastfeeding goes. And then having my own child, my first daughter was born when I was making that product. And then my wife, and of course, I love her to death, but she was colicky. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't breastfeed, and it was really challenging watching my wife like go through this process. And I was designing a product at the same time that I was having a kid and learning about all those experiences, And so that was like an immersion in like, okay, human-centered design of it all. You can have that experience anywhere, but as an entrepreneur, just the access is easier. It's right there,
Right.
I could jump in an ambulance and go like drive around with the team, and they'd be like, Tariq, this is not good. You need to fix this. They're looking at the prototype or whatever. As an entrepreneur, it's a little bit harder because you have to go seek out those groups that are going to allow you to come in and clinically pilot things. The more relationships you have, I think in healthcare, I was watching another podcast talking about relationships, and that's everywhere, right? It's business and health, any problem you're trying to solve. If you have those relationships, you have to leverage those relationships and figure out how to take a little bit of risk to pilot a new technology or pilot a known technology and try to use it for a different purpose, and get into that space where then you can clinically validate and say, hey, we tested this on 50 patients. It looks like there's some promise here. We need to do more work, but, thank you. We'll write a white paper. We'll kind of talk about it, and maybe we'll try to scale it and get into some other spaces. And so that sometimes is a little bit harder, and you have to leverage the relationships that you have within healthcare to sometimes do that, or look for interested institutions, or there are hospitals with innovation labs. Like CHLA has the Kids X Accelerator. They're very open to different things, and like Boston Children's and Children's National in Washington D.C. They have groups set up to specifically look at innovation, and there are those institutions can be good to go to as an entrepreneur, so you can kind of overcome that hurdle. But I think those are kind of the two key things that I look at. I'm just going to pause and look at my notes here because I have a feeling.
I think those are great, and I think you're talking about that ease of adoption and access, right? Which is it does sound categorically different if you're working inside and you're solving an organization's problems and you have access to the people who have that problem versus on the outside, and this chicken and egg challenge you have as an entrepreneur of, I can't get anyone to want to be the guinea pig for my thing unless I can show evidence that it works. I can't get evidence that it works unless I can get someone to be a guinea pig for my thing. Yeah, and I'm just curious that whether, and that is a huge problem for these digital health startups, is getting that initial pilot, that initial win, access to real patients or physicians. And I'm curious if your kind of inside scoop working within a health system and how to navigate and how these organizations go about evaluating innovations, is that really useful to you on the other side of the table of trying to break into organizations and have them use a thing?
Oh, it's extremely useful. I think thinking how, like I'm at an academic institution now, which is like very different than being at a very business minded health system. That's an HMO like Kaiser Permanente. I think that they were like Kaiser Permanente, for example, is very forward thinking in the way they looked at startups, but they were very tough. If you're a little startup, they were really tough on evaluating companies and sitting there watching. I was privileged to be able to attend a lot of work at the Kaiser's Innovation Center in Oakland called the Garfield Center. And kind of work and get mentored by a lot of startups, and go there on my days off. I mean, and just kind of do that work. And sometimes we would be like sitting in these Shark Tank like scenarios where we'd be looking at other startups and evaluating them and having like little pitch sessions. And you really had to be quite impressive to break in, and really had to get to a certain level where you had some clinical validation. You were showing outcomes that were improved to really break into the bigger company. And it's kind of, at least at that time. And so it's really challenging. You're going to have to bring quite a lot to really break into a bigger organization and bring your evidence. Right. If you do find other groups, I'm not sure how Graphite is functioning now, for example, that, Kaiser Permanente is participating in, but if you can break in and get into kind of like design studio type or innovation studio type scenarios within certain healthcare companies, they're going to be more kind of thoughtful or forgiving for your mistakes and let you do some of the work. I think that's an advantage. And there's people doing that work out there. There's more and more of that developing. But it's really hard to break in, and you got to bring some evidence. And sometimes it's better to start small and start pilots and other, smaller practices, and not go for the way I kind of refer to KP as the white whale. It's like, no, don't, you're in a rowboat. Don't go try to harpoon harpoon the whale. Start small and build your way up. And then when you don't boil the ocean. Then you go after the bigger fish, right? Because the white whale can destroy you if you're not careful, because it's, so it's my kind of description of it.
That's great learnings. Gosh, and I know after hearing you speak, there's going to be a lot of people that want to work with people like you. And now you're a chief medical officer of Omniscia Health and advisor to multiple healthcare startups. And I would love to ask some basic questions for really targeted from the people that you work with. What is the role of a chief medical officer or advisor in a digital health startup?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, basically, it's someone there who has some experience in healthcare. It doesn't have to be a physician. It certainly can be a nurse. It can be a psychologist, someone that has the right amount of expertise for the type of work that you're doing, or has a broad expertise and understanding of how healthcare works and how the healthcare system works. That basically tries to be embedded within your company and help guide the process and help set you on that path that kind of follows some of the values, some of the needs, some of the importance of quality and safety in healthcare, and helps you make the right decisions from a healthcare mindset. And I think a lot of companies you can get that if you're an early company, you can't afford to pay a CMO. Like in my case at Omniscia, it's one of those things as I was learning, I'm like, okay, well, let's do an equity-based, fractional relationship, as we start out, and then you kind of, you can give away I guess you can say, you can start by giving away free samples, which is kind of what equity is.
In kind, yes. In kind.
If you get into later stage companies and it's often harder for very early stage companies to actually pay the types of salaries that physicians require with all their loans and training and, mortgage and, it's kind of a different lifestyle and a different thing that you're set up and locked into. So it's a little harder for very early stage companies to bring on CMOs that aren't working as a clinician or working as a doctor. Ultimately, you have to kind of do it fractionally or do other things, or you have to put together multiple different pieces where you're getting little pieces of the pie. And if you ever talk to Arlen Myers, and go to his CMO school. He's an ENT surgeon out of, I think, Colorado, but he's big in the physician entrepreneur space, and does a lot of coaching and mentoring, and kind of tells us, hey, this world is different. It's really hard. You can't expect to go to some early seed stage startup and say, oh, just pay me $200,000 to be your CM. It just doesn't work like that. You may not have the resources, but you can advise and give advice and guide product development when you're early on, and figure out ways to do that to help a great idea really be molded into a safe idea that is going to work in clinical spaces, and then set a pathway to hey, here's how you clinically validate a product. We either want to do a QI project, or maybe we do want to do a randomized controlled trial at a particular clinical institution. And by the way, I know people at this institution. Let me help bring it in and bring a little credibility. So I think at the end of the day, CMOs are about credibility in the healthcare space. And a lot of times people are going to choose to do that later on. But if you're not getting a CMO early in the process for designing a digital healthcare product, you should certainly get a lot of advice and talk to a lot of people beforehand. And then if you're trying to make a digital health product and you think because everything about the space, because of your personal experience, I would just take caution. It's people's experiences are very unique, and you have to design a product that you want to sell to many people that fits a broad range of experiences. And you may have this really passionate story about an N of one, or yourself, or what your family went through or something, but that may not translate to the rest of the world. Right. And so sometimes people, clinicians or physicians or nurses or whatever have seen 20,000 examples, right? So they may be able to help you level set as you're coming up with a product. But those people also, CMO has to be open-minded and be willing to, meet people halfway and think about things in a different way while also being safe, right? Because if you have someone that's we're only going to do things one way and we won't change, that's the wrong type of person to try to become a CMO of a digital health startup, right? So you have to choose someone that's open-minded, willing to work with you and negotiate, but bring balance, like get something that works, but also drive the bleeding edge of innovation and take some risk. So it's kind of a weird space to be.
Gosh, and how do you find each other? So there's the founder entrepreneur that needs the medical adult in the room to either guide a safe innovation or how to navigate a health system or the industry, and then there's physician entrepreneurs, or maybe not. Maybe they're not founding their own separate company, but they want to be participating, let's say at the CMO level with the startup. How do you go about finding each other? How does a CMO find a startup, and how does a startup find a CMO?
Yeah, that I'll tell you first off, that's really challenging because, being in that space is interesting. And sometimes you have to get lucky, or, like me connecting with Omniscia Health was basically, this was a lot of the founders that were there were the same founders that I worked with on KP Baby, that chatbot virtual assistant that I was doing at Kaiser. So I kind of like already vet. It's like, okay, I worked with these guys for 5 years. So it seemed like a natural progression after I left, but that's kind of getting lucky, right? It's challenging. I think there's a lot of work that has to happen for the person that really wants to be a chief medical officer or to be involved. Maybe you're a product officer or some other, whatever the title is, you really have to decide for yourself that that's what you want to do, and then figure out how to put yourself out there. And physicians have no training in branding themselves or marketing themselves. So it's like you just sit there and you're like, why won't someone hire me for, you have to be out there in the space. And again, leading to Arlen Myers, he's like, what did he say? He's some paraphrasing him. He's like, oh, if you want to do this and you don't like LinkedIn, you are, he'd basically like, oh, you're a moron. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing. Right. He's just brash in the way he says things. It's like, what are you thinking? You have to get yourself out there. So I think a lot of that goes on the CM. You have to look for people, right, in some marketplace. And marketplaces can be like LinkedIn. You can start to, if you're a physician, you can write, you can be a researcher, you start to publish stuff, figure out some way to get out your ideas out there. And by the way, as an entrepreneur, it's very hard because I was doing things that were like intellectual property of KP. So I did like 10 years of work on multiple products and I couldn't
talk about it.
So it's like a downside of being an entrepreneur, right? So I'm having to tell stories and go on podcasts on Persimmon Health, right? So that's, but you have to wait to tell your story of the things that you believe, the things you're interested in, the work you've done, and figure out how to tell that story. It can be publications, writing a book, or whatever. But you have to the physician has to put themselves in a place where they can be known. And the physicians can, do that. They can join accelerators that are looking for physician mentors. They can join incubators. They can basically start talking to venture capitalists that they know. And because venture capitalists and angel investors they're investing in companies, and now they're like, well, I want this digital healthcare company or this med tech company to succeed. And maybe they need someone to help validate their work. So they'll be looking for doctors that have the expertise or the desire. So it's basically comes down to networking, right? And so the physician has to do part of the role. They have to put themselves in a place where
that's great
they're
advice.
known,
and I know so many
saying,
startups that we work with are looking
for commodity
for
that can help, and this is what I love doing, right? And then on the other side, once you have the physician or the CMO, whoever, or a nurse, whoever doing their piece of the pie, then the founder, the entrepreneur can do their piece, right? Which is then to work with accelerators that are in the digital health space, or do all the same things, or search out people that seem to be talking about some of the things they like to do, or writing books, or really getting their message out there. Then you can connect. So it's a two-way street, right? It's like the entrepreneur, the co-founder can't do anything if there's no one out there, because otherwise you're just getting lucky. You're like, well, let me talk to my friend, friend of a friend of a friend. And those things work, and that's how it started. But if you really want to be systematic about it, as they're talking to like a process systems guy, it's like make yourself visible, and on both ends, make yourself visible about what you're doing, what you believe in, and go to these different sources and it's like you can find marketplaces to put yourself together, but it's not well advertised. You have to kind of discover it. And I'd say like example, like Innovator MD, which is like one of the groups that got me started. They have started kind of a marketplace where people can put their names out there saying, hey, I'm looking for this type of role. And so that's really early and nascent in that process. But that's like another avenue that exists, and there'll be more as digital health grows, because it has to grow, and it has to grow with some clinical expertise in it to really succeed and really do things the right way. And it's more of a marriage. It's like technologists and entrepreneurs can bring great ideas. They have to work with physicians or clinical folks that are open-minded and want to do it differently. Right. And together, when you put them together, you're really going to get products, and you're going to really have chances to scale and develop things that are amazing.
Right. So find those communities where people are already going. So that could be the incubators. It could be the investor communities. It could be the Innovator MDs, the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. But ideally, people who are similarly motivated and engaged on either side can find each other there, where people like that hang out.
Yeah. And I think if you're a physician, if you're a doctor that wants, and if you're a doctor that wants to do this, I'll tell you here, I'll point. So if you're a physician out there, you got to get yourself out there and got to, start but first think about why you want to do it. Why do you want to do medicine and be an entrepreneur? And what does that mean for your family? And how many hours a week do you want to go fully into entrepreneur? Why? What's your vision? What's your dream? My mentor, Steve Muthing, who's actually a quality and safety person, told me, I was at a conference in 2009. Steve Muthing's a big leader, international leader, and he works out at the Anderson Center at Cincinnati Children's, a great pediatrician. And he basically said, I can help so many people by basically seeing patients like one at a time, and maybe I'll have a huge impact 1 or 2 times a month by going to my clinic or the hospital or whatever. But it's like, if you build a system that really affects multiple, like you can help thousands, hundreds, millions of people when you're like not working, right? It's just exponential. And the impact you can have is really huge. And so that is like part of my mantra of like, I want to bring all these things. I want to bring human-centered design in to really help more people than I can possibly touch. Right. So that's kind of part of my personal vision and my personal mission. And everyone will have whatever that mission is, but you have to go develop one, and you might have to take some time and really think about what it is you want. And I think that's probably the most important message for physician entrepreneurs is like, make sure you want it. It's like the same thing with going to med school. It's a long, hard road. Make sure you want to be a doctor. Make sure you want anything in life you want to do. So make sure that that's really something that fits for you. And beware that it may change 5 or 10 years later. So,
Yep. Case in point.
And then you just reassess. And then you pivot, just like you do in entrepreneurship or you do in quality improvement.
It's a lean lifestyle. Yep. Awesome. I was hoping to back out too and just get your general advice for digital health startups and your take on the ecosystems, and you having been on both sides. So I really love your perspective on, gosh, what is a healthcare disruptor or innovator? These terms get tossed around, and I'm just wondering if that definition has evolved in your journey from doctor to entrepreneur, advisor, etc.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I thought the word, there's so many different words. Like I was talking to someone else the other day and I said, well, are you an entrepreneur? I said, well, I was an entrepreneur and then I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in a company now, but they're like, oh, did you get acquired? And I was like, no, not yet. We're early in that. It's like, oh, so you're not an entrepreneur. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, maybe, I guess if you can define it that way. I think a nice, like a word that probably fits it would be like an innovator, a physician innovator, because it's a little bit neutral or can involve both of the spaces. And whether I'm thinking about an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur and being on both sides, I think that encompasses a little bit of all of that. The other phrase that I like is also the word about being a positive disruptor. And, with disruption, you're kind of challenging the status quo and trying to, you can be taken two different ways. You can be a disruptor and be the person that complains a lot and is negative, and you're trying to burn the place down. But, if you're a positive disruptor, you're trying to actually improve things, and I kind of like that, to use that term personally. You're trying to bring positive disruption to healthcare. Because I think it tries to change. You want to change the things about the system that don't work, but do it in a right way, and always have like an attitude of like, we're going to make things, but things are hard and maybe they're not working, and we're going to make it better. And like, when I see a lot of my colleagues are like, oh, this is broken, blah, 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 and then they stop. I'm like, so what are you going to do? Well, I just wanted to point out, it's like, yeah, everyone's, it's like, can you, I mean, that's the difference between, I think being like an innovator or someone that's actually changing things, and then just another person in the crowd or the peanut gallery that's like complaining about how broken things are. It's like, it's hard to go out and do those things, right? And you may not do them, and you're going to fail, and you put yourself out there, and it's, there's reputational risk, and it's like, it's hard, but that's what actually changes the world, right? And I think being an innovator is actually, at the end of the day, it should be about trying to do that, or trying to change a piece of the world and make it better. So you have to try. So I think positive disruptor is like, that's a little bit like why I like that term. There has to be a recognition, a plan, and then you got to do something about it, because otherwise you're just, someone
you're just recognizing. Yeah. Right. So on positive disruption, I'm just wondering your personal outlook on those healthcare innovations and positive disruptions. How have priorities changed when you look at the need for disruptions or innovations or startups from your kind of 360-degree view?
I think that I think a lot of the problems with the healthcare system, with the fee-for-service system being as you hear a lot of people talk about, like a sick care system, have been there for so many years. The incentives are such that it's so much easier for the way the system is designed to actually profit or make money from basically, reacting or being a reactive system to when patients are ill, or paying for acute care or surgeries. And it's our system isn't designed to take advantage of people doing population management. And really providing preventative health care, which is really going to change how healthy your population is. It's going to change the amount of healthcare dollars. It's going to improve outcomes, right? And it's a different mentality. And I keep talking about KP, even though I left. It's just an amazing organization, and like being an accountable healthcare organization that's integrated. Intermountain Health is another example, and there's many other integrated systems that are really taking on the population health mission. And I think that needs to be where healthcare goes. And my thesis is that using a tool, right? It's like, not, people say, oh, telehealth, you can't change medicine. It's like, no, but it's a tool in your toolkit. It's like, here, I'm going to pick up a hammer, a screwdriver. It's a tool that can help the clinicians out there extend their capabilities and bridge some of the gaps and solve some of the problems some of the things that are really broken about the healthcare system, and maybe, use your resources in a more wise way and try to get to some of those outcomes. I think my view of, like, the holistic view of innovation is that the pandemic has these things always existed, and then the pandemic forced people to think a little differently, and they had to, right? So I don't think it's a revolution. I think it's an evolution. And the evolution sped up for this time period and forced people to do what was already out there. There was a ton of people doing, like, I did a bunch of telehealth work at KP as well, and it just never quite took off. And people would say, hey, you're using it in your integrated healthcare model and HMO, you're not billing for your telehealth. How is that? That doesn't work for me. It's like, we're doing the right thing. We're providing you specialty care services in 3 seconds on demand in your ER. I'm helping you resuscitate an incredibly sick kid, and you don't have that skill set. And if we do it right, you might be able to keep that kid actually in the community instead of driving 100 miles to me over here in Silicon Valley or something, And it's like, well, how do you pay for that? And it's like, part of me is like, was always like, who cares? You're doing the right thing.
Right. We don't pay for something else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and the business reality is like, the way the market was structured is like, it forced you to make these weird decisions to not not do the right thing or not leverage technology in the right way because your payer system didn't recognize doing the work that way. But that's not, and COVID like changed that, right? Now telehealth has become ubiquitous, and I don't think it makes any sense to go back. And I think people, once they're realizing that, they're like, oh yeah, why would we do anything
Yeah,
else?
no, it's ubiquitous, but I mean, just because it has the billing code now, right? That's been blessed. But I think the truth is, as you nailed, unless you're one of these integrated systems, really the payment system is structured around treating people when they're sick rather than preventing people from getting sick when they're well. And you're touching a lot on a lot of these things and techniques and technologies that have been there, but it's just this lack of built-in incentive for doing those things because you're only charged when there's a code and you're this transactional service or visit that's provided, which is really, I think, holding back, right, the industry from making those, big leaps that maybe you're able to make within KP or Intermountain is. But from the rest of the people, like your anecdote, they have this completely warped view of, gosh, the first question they're asking is not, how did the patients do? It is, how did you pay for it, right? And that's something I think we need to address.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's where, I mean, that's just one example, and a lot, it's not like everyone is asking that, but that weighs heavily on the mind of our healthcare system, right, and physicians and administrators trying to design new systems, and it sadly shouldn't be, and it kind of distracts from the potential that we have to really, I think really healthcare ecosystems are where the future is. And those ecosystems should be augmented with virtual care. We have all these virtual care tools, whether you're bringing intelligent virtual agents or chatbots and telemedicine, bringing direct to consumer. It's like I've always thought, it's like, well, why don't we have medical food trucks that are getting out, that are getting out there to communities and bringing the care a little bit closer, rather than creating the academic center as the center. Like everyone has to drive here to get your care. It's like, we have the capability to get more of that out there to them. We don't know how to bill for that yet. If we do remote patient monitoring and patient reported outcomes and use digital tools to get more of the data, instead of seeing everyone every 3 months, our system is built to see someone in a clinic visit or see someone in the hospital on these time intervals where their life is changing continuously. Right. And everyone's like, well, I don't want to be on call 24/7. I don't want to be, how do I build a system around that? We just haven't designed a system like that. We can, and I think we will. And I think there's really interesting ways to make the system work with all the different tools we have in our toolkit. We can redesign a healthcare system that works better, keeps patients closer to their community, is more virtual, tries to break down some of the barriers of social determinants of health, geography and rural versus urban romance. But we have to, and as I was commenting, I was even on LinkedIn commenting on a post, like yesterday, it's like, I'm in University of Kentucky where we deal with Appalachia, which, Wi-Fi, having people with smartphones, that there's a segment of the community that's not digitally connected. So if we make virtual care systems that are just, running and we're doing all our care, we are actually also leaving behind populations that, have to go to Wi-Fi or to get Wi-Fi. They have to go to like the McDonald's in their community, maybe, or something, or some other like place just to get wireless if they have a smart device. Right. So we have to like think also about like, how can we help bring other communities along? Because, digital health isn't going to solve all those problems. Right. So
that's a great point. Great point. And then you talk a lot about user-centered design, which I love. That's what I studied when I was in college. But I'm curious how your definition of the target user has evolved over the years. So it used to be very patient, physician-centric, right? Like those are the two users, or maybe the nursing staff or admins. How has your idea of who you're designing for evolved?
Yeah, I think I've become much less physician-centric in my thinking. I think that's always become this kind of like, years later, I'm like, why did I ever think like that? Right? That's not, and I've tried to evolve to like, we have to think about care teams and healthcare. Healthcare takes a village. or dealing with someone's chronic disease really takes a village. And it's not just about the patient and doctor. They're at the center of it, right? Actually, the patient is at the center of it. And then around that patient is a healthcare team, which includes the doctor, but there's so many other people nowadays. There's like case managers or, physical therapists, psychologists, licensed LMFTs, different therapists that may be involved in their care. And they're all part of that team, and the team has to be integrated and working together, just like any sport or any, industry. It's like that team has to be collectively connected so they can do the right thing for the patient at the right time scale and overcome the patient's personal barriers. And also think about I love it, some of the stuff we're doing at Omniscia brings in some behavioral profiling and motivational interviewing into some of the tactics that we're doing, and trying to think about, why does the patient want to get better? And it's like, we're always like, I want you to take your medications. I want you to take your MS drug so you can walk farther, and but someone's motivation is like, I just want to play with my grandkids. And so maybe we need to like change our conversation and think about, like, the EMRs actually at the top of the EMR should be like, hi, I'm Anne. The most important thing in my life is that I can ride my horse on the weekend, or I can play with my grandkids, or I can walk to the park. Right. That's the banner on your EMR. Now you work from that. Right. And it's like physically putting the patient at the center instead of what we have now. And it's like, people are probably like, well, what are you talking about? But, that's like some of the thinking we put into like the platform at Omniscia is like, let's think about things differently and flip things on their head. And also think about like the caregiver, like you have a patient, but I'm a pediatrician, so I think about that. But at all levels, we have our spouses and our families. As we get older, we have our children helping to care for us, and so the care team involves your caregivers, and how do we integrate them in a way that makes sense into that ecosystem? And can the ecosystem, as I'm talking about technology, you realize I'm not talking that much about technology here, right? Yep. The technology we have can augment all that, but it's really about a network of people working together to solve someone's healthcare problems. Take that village, right? Whether you have, when you throw in all the different tools in the toolkit, so you throw in chatbots and synchronous and telehealth, like video telehealth and asynchronous care, and an EMR that actually makes sense, and doctors that have time, and home health visits, and, think about hospital home, or getting things out to the patient in the timeliness that they need it, and having interconnectedness. We have all the tools to put that together. Yeah. We have all of them. We just have to agree that it's like, hey, let's start building that network.
Right. And I love that aspect or that visualization of user-centered design in terms of the patient's real goals. Because, you've worked with behavior change before, and the truth is it's an uphill battle, or it just doesn't work unless the patient has this intrinsic motivation towards whatever you're actually working towards. And so you may have this completely different framing, right, within your EHR, your mental model as a physician, that is just not going to resonate with that intrinsic motivation of, I want to play with my grandkids. But if it is front and center, like you said, if the patient is at the center, and you get everyone speaking that same language that resonates with someone who needs to change their behavior, right, maybe that will actually make the difference. Speaking in terms that matter to people.
Yeah, and that may be that's a big lift, right? To get people to think differently about how they provide. I think that's what, when you talk to patients, and I recently did a quality improvement course through Cincinnati, and they brought on patients to teach us about what they thought was wrong with healthcare. You learn something every time, and it's like looking at the viewpoint, like this mom told us this really simple thing, who had a kid with a terribly chronic rare disease. And she's like, don't call me mom. Ask me what my name is when you come in the room as a new healthcare provider of anyone, because that shows that you care about a relationship. You want to know who you're talking to. And on the street, if you're dealing with a normal thing, you'd say, hi, hi, I'm Tariq, or, what's your name? What do you want to be called? Right? It's like that little thing is like creating human connections, or these things we've lost as we build relationships and we try to work in medicine. And it's like our technologies should think about that too, because we should be thinking about that, right? And so we can redesign, maybe we can redesign EMRs to work differently. I jokingly call EMRs like an electronic file cabinet, because I think that's still, it's like you have a bunch of tabs and all this, and it's like, this should look like something we see in Minority Report or Iron Man. I mean, or it should be like, why is the patient right in the middle? Like, give me a picture of the patient and their life is there, and then I'm going to understand how to solve problems around their life. Right. It might be more meaningful, or might connect us more and build a sense of trust, which is, I think, a problem with a lot of communities too. Is like, we're not, are we doing? Do they really think that we're doing the right thing? Are we listening to them? And if we put the things that are important in their life up front in these like platforms or this ecosystem we build for them, then we're forced to listen to, or we're showing that we're listening to them and showing what's important, instead of thinking like, okay, I gotta get their hemoglobin A1C down. So here's what's on my playbook to do, and blah, blah, blah. They're talking about, the hard things in their life and why they can't buy meds or transportation, and we're just like missing the boat and actually changing their life. It's like, right. Can we do that differently? I think we can.
Exactly. That's great. Yeah. And like you said, and maybe the target user is wrong or underrepresented. Like, I mean, in the pediatrics case, or in the chronic disease for older populations where, gosh, these people may not be able to use technology. And yet we're trying to put these patient engagement tools in front of them where they may not be able to use them, or they may not wake up every day wanting to be engaged. So it is just acknowledging that there will be those people in that circle around the patient. Like, maybe it is the caregiver, right, that you should be designing for, who's going to really be a boots on the ground person who can engage with the health system. And it's more complicated than that old mental model of physician this side, patient this side. Oh, Tariq, I would love to back out to some big picture questions, because I know I'm keeping you a while, if that's okay. But
yeah, that's total. I have a little bit more time, so if we want to ask some more questions.
Awesome. Okay, that's why I wanted to know. So when we talked last time, you had an observation about the startup ecosystem. You said that, gosh, unicorn hunting may not be the best thing for digital health. So can you please explain what is unicorn hunting, and why may not that be the best thing?
So this is one of those. This will be the controversial part of the interview, where I'll say things that my VC friends will be like, "Why'd you say that?" But I mean, I think that the phrase comes up so often when you think about like the business perspective of what it is, and I think we think about a unicorn, in the digital, as a company that's like you're getting an investment and it's just blowing up. It is like it is really giving you a ton on your investment, and when I think groups are investing in things, are looking for those things that are going to be really successful, and that does translate into financial success and scalability and things like that. And I think that there's in the digital healthcare space, or in the healthcare space in general, there's a little bit of a risk of like getting a little bit too focused on, okay, I'm looking for the unicorn, and we should be looking for things that are actually delivering on safe, effective care, and improving access for people, or streamlining the logistical pain points in the care that drive people crazy and drive them away from healthcare, or improve access, or break down the barriers of social determinants of health, like just things that are conveniences, make the experience better. It's like, that's where the focus is. And I fear, my concern is that, when you're looking at, driving companies and taking the right ideas and funding them, it's like, well, can I sell that idea? Can I scale that idea? Can I make money with the idea? And it's a challenge. It's not like, is this the best thing to help our population? Right. That's not front and center. And that, again, that's part of the economics and the business of healthcare in this country, and, and the investment market. So it just makes it a little challenging. I think that's where some of the danger can come in. And then when you get companies that have like kind of not delivered on the clinical piece of it, you end up with companies that can be like, everyone's like, oh, this is great and scalable and it's a great idea. And did we do our due diligence? Did we really vet out, is this going to work? Do we have evidence that this is making a difference? Because then at the end of the day, you get a couple of years on the road and it doesn't work, and it doesn't drive outcomes. And it's like, everyone's wasted their time. Right. So, or you may have harmed patients, like there's some stuff coming out to, today's like, was there patient harm with, a company overprescribing, medications, without really due diligence and looking at clinical quality, and efficacy. And so you can potentially cause harm, and I think that quality and safety has to be part of digital healthcare, and you might as well bring it in early. And make sure you're doing the right thing. And I think the analogy, this is probably about, it's like, I'm not looking for a unicorn. It's like, we should look for like a pack mule. I'm like, what? what are you talking about? And it's like something that it's going to be sustainable, repeatable, does the work efficiently, carries a heavy load. It can do the same thing every time. Right. And we're looking for, my daughters talk about unicorns and being fancy and magical, and, they poop out cupcakes or whatever. But I mean, we need a pack mule that gets it done, right? That gets things done over and over again in a repeatable way and helps you. And that's not sexy. And maybe it's not going to get that. It doesn't get me 100x return on investment. And this only gets like 7.5x return on investment. But man, I helped millions of people. Because it just makes sense, right? And you're gonna end up making a lot. You may end up from an investment or business side, you may getting big returns, but from a healthcare perspective, you may end up changing the way you're changing your entire ecosystem and the way it works, right? But you have to prioritize things differently, So
yeah, I think it's a great point, Tariq, and I think it's no secret that even though there's like $30 billion in funding that went into digital health startups in 2021, but really the jury is still out on their impact. And I think it was last week that Rock Health put out an article investigating the impact or measurable outcomes of digital health startups, and came to the conclusion really that it's hard to tell because so many are privately held, but they did note that 20% of the digital health startups represent the vast majority of things like clinical trials, regulatory filings, and claims on effectiveness. And and most of the startups, 80%, fail this formula they came up with for clinical robustness. And it's not damning by any means because, like you said, results take time within healthcare. But I think it does argue for building that in, right, as one of those things that, you really need to look for that kind of progressive investment, or at least look for in your unicorns that it can have that impact.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of like investment, and don't get me wrong, like not, poo-pooing the entire investment community, because obviously there's people that are doing it right. And there's people that are really doing due diligence and, trying to use creating pipeline type systems, where they're using their accelerators and saying, okay, they're vetting companies. It's like, okay, these companies we've seen, they seem to do it right. And then there's clinical validation. So, hey, we're going to put more into these companies that look like, you're just being more careful about where you're putting your money instead of like, oh, that was a great sales pitch here, and it's obviously an oversimplification, but I mean, like thinking about what is valued and so I think the process of how we, create valuation for some of these companies and how we fund some of those companies is also important. Who we give it to. Are you giving it to the person that really has the best science backing what they're doing? Or is it the person that delivered the best pitch, or do you need a combination of both, right? You need to be somewhere in the middle, right? And so I think that's a huge challenge. And I think if you're looking at, that I saw that article and I'm like, if you're measuring what's been funded since 2021, it's like, how the heck are you going to look at outcomes like from, it's like, publish this in 5 years. That's how you're good. I mean, just like in healthcare quality improvement, I'll say it's like the cycles, unless you're measuring data every day, usually you're measuring data in weeks and months. You're not going to know for a long time. That's why you have to be like constantly iterating. And that's why I advocate for something like process improvement and looking at your data and metrics in a continual way to really know if you're going in the right track and succeeding. You have to be doing litmus tests constantly, right? And so I think it's more the process, like the process of how digital health companies are being funded, how they're growing, that and getting the right types of people and the right mindset into growing them, that will probably drive more success, or hopefully can drive more success in some of those companies.
Yeah, no, I think I think you have the right values, and I mean, I would guess that it's going to be the 20% of the companies that actually built something of impact and value that's demonstrable to the rest of the system that are going to be the ones that are ultimately very successful, regardless of the unicorn start or not, right? It'll be the ones that actually have the provable clinical outcomes. It'll be the people that created the patient engagement tools that patients will actually use, or the people that create the physician tools that avoid alert fatigue that physicians or people that work around them, the care team, will actually use. And like you said, that's going to take time to play out. And I mean, it sounds like you know a lot about that process of making sure that you get to those points, right? I mean, I was one of those entrepreneurs that failed my first time because I thought I was smarter than my users and thought I knew everything. And I studied design, but then I designed for myself, even though I wasn't the target user. So I think having that methodology, right, and those learnings and, being humbled and having the mentorship that you've had is so critical to making, right, that startup journey more of a step-by-step, right, in which you can, with the right process, iterate towards success, not just start out with the master plan that's going to be the one that wins 5 years from now, because that almost never happens, right?
Yeah. And I think, showing humility is probably that important thing. And like learning, it's like, I'm never going to do what I did the first time. I'll make maybe a different mistake. Right. I'm not going to make that other mistake I made with going too big and too far and going for the moonshot. That was too big early on. And, but there was, there was one other story that I wanted to bring up around intrapreneurship versus entrepreneurship, because as we're running on time, there was in 2012, I got married to my wonderful wife, Christy, and one of Christy's, my wife's family friends was Jerry and Connie Heldon. And Jerry is an amazing investor, and he's on 1 million boards if you look him up. And he was the senior VP at Oracle, with Larry Ellison back in the 90s. And so just a really wise business guy, and just a really just wonderful person, and really thoughtful. So they took us out to dinner to celebrate our wedding, because they weren't able to attend, and they wanted to celebrate us. And so I just finished this ambulance product, and I was just hot to trot and be like, oh man, it's like, I want to do this for, I want to be an innovator, and maybe I should go and do a startup. And I remember I asked him when we were, hanging around eating dinner, and he kind of just, in his really gentle way, he was sitting next to me. He's like, I think my advice is I think you should stay in, and I think you should learn more about the company. You should work on your skills. You should learn more about communicating and pitching. Just give it time. Do another one. Don't run out there. And I was like, well, okay. And I'm like, oh, wow, this, I should listen to this guy. He's he's like a Silicon Valley, kind of legend, and is out there in the investing, in the community. And it was such great advice to realize that I didn't have all the skills I needed yet. And continuing the entrepreneurship journey allowed me to cultivate more skills and develop leadership skills and communication skills that, that have made me a much better entrepreneur and change manager, quality improvement, physician, quality improvement expert and physician leader. And so sometimes, getting that advice and listening to it can be really helpful, because you may need to grow and develop a little bit more. So that was one thing that was really that molded my decision to be an entrepreneur, as opposed to just leaping out and going, because I actually had opportunity, and I think it was 2011, 2012, around then.
Okay.
Someone's a great startup founder said, "Hey, you want to join my startup? I need someone to help with my products. You've done some cool stuff. I met you at the Garfield Center." And I declined it. And I said, I've really got to learn. And it's been really fantastic to continue this journey and learn more. And if I would have left at that time, I probably would just made a huge pile of mistakes. But now having in the safety of being in a company where I can okay, I'm going to fall back to my day job of running a division and or helping to, be a leader, and gain all that, and gain all those skill sets and be mentored further. And even that second startup guy that I turned down, I'm talking to him in 2 hours. Basically, okay. I'm still in contact with him, and we're sharing our product development stories and demos. And it's awesome. These you can make these decisions, but you should listen to those around you. And I didn't always listen when I was brash and young. And there's some people out there that really can give you some great advice.
Gosh, yeah, I learned that too. I was brash and young, and I would hear people but not be listening to them. And there's that saying that, hey, when a student is ready, a teacher arrives. And it sounds like you had some great teachers at those right moments for you. So I guess there's two more questions that I have. One is, do you have a single piece of advice that you would give to physicians who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to be innovators within healthcare?
Yeah, and I'd kind of mentioned this before, but I think the most important message is to essentially know thyself, right?
Okay.
Is think about you can be good at ideas or code or have some skills or have a bunch of skills, but it doesn't mean anything unless you really know why it is you want to go and be an entrepreneur, why you want to take that step out. Because for me, that means to really get into it at the level that I want to be transformative. At some point I'm going to have to probably leave clinical medicine or make it a very small part, a small part of the work that I do, because there's just not enough time in the day. And I for my family, I can't work 100 hours a week anymore. You made that mistake. You just sometimes can't do enough or can't do all of that. Right. So just understanding what your purpose is, what you want to achieve, and why you want to become an entrepreneur is the most important exercise that you need to do first. And if you need to, you should probably write it down and then walk away from it and come back and look at it and think about it, because it's a tough journey. And for a lot of physicians, it's the same as making the decision to go to med school. It is a tough journey. And so you made one tough decision and went down this road. So now you want to change and take on another one. You better have it set in your mind why, right? And then take pause and think about it. Talk to the people around you that know you, because you may talk to your spouse or you may talk to other people and that's not you. You're just being, charmed by this cool idea of, you're the kind of the high of getting a successful product, or you got some money out of something and you're oh, I can do this, just take pause and be thoughtful and think about why you're doing it.
Right.
And then, I think that's the most important thing to do first, because then you can go out there with purpose. And when you establish that, that's going to make you do all the hard things that are necessary to really be an entrepreneur, which is really hard. And it's different than what a lot of us learned in our medical or professional health schools or nursing school. It's a different thing,
Got it. Well, yeah, I'm hoping some of these physician entrepreneurs come to you for advice, though, on what it's like based on hearing this podcast. Last question, Tariq, is you mentioned this idea of a medical food truck model, and I thought it sounded interesting just even on the face of it. And I guess just taking out your crystal ball or wish list, what is your ideal state for U.S. healthcare, and a little bit more about what a medical food truck model represents?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny little quip that I throw out there. But essentially at the root of it is, I think about, trying to get a healthcare system that is not necessarily centralized around the medical center,
Right.
that are put in these places where you start to build out those social determinants of health that are then barriers to getting the right care, like distance and transportation and financial resources. Can you get off work to get to something? It's like, how can you get care, the right type of care, and get it spread out to communities and get closer to people? I think part of that is virtual, right? And so you can do things if you take care to make sure we're getting the right. Do we have to subsidize smart devices or little like Wi-Fi, devices out to people that are in communities that don't have them, right? I think there's a danger in, if you go all virtual, you can't go all virtual because you need to lay hands, as these providers, and have face-to-face relationships too. So like the virtual care system is part of your ecosystem that augments the care that you deliver when you lay hands on people, right? And I think that care, where I get to the medical food truck idea, is that it doesn't mean that you have to have somebody drive into your hospital all the time. Why do we have to do it that way? It's built around our resources. The resource where we spend millions or $1 billion to build our concrete structure, someplace so we can house everyone for our convenience. We put a lot of costs into overhead, but what if we made those smaller footprints and we decentralized our work and we got out to the community? Right. And so like thinking about a medical food truck where you're getting out there in communities and kind of using, I remember like I've worked on a mobile health vehicle for University of Kentucky too. And so, like kind of continually doing some of those things that are really neat to get out there. So reaching out to the community, also doing, expanding home health services. It's like you can, and we did some of this at Kaiser. You can throw some of these things in a backpack and take a router and your laptop and a little camera, pop it up, and get providers out there that can do visits out in the community. And then when you need extra support or specialty support, why not connect with them? People through video. Can you get remote digital devices? Can you do point of care lab testing? Can you do point of care ultrasound that is in your kit? Can you basically have like a medical Uber service that gets around and gets providers connected to people. So it's just like you're changing the distance a little bit, but it's not all one way. It's not all, healthcare centric. It's like, you're going to come here. That may be that, and it has to really build on a philosophy of population health management. So you're thinking out there, it's like your visit is going to be to the home and you're visiting the family. You're not visiting one person. You're going to see like, what are all the impediments to healthcare that's within the system and within a family, right? Instead of just like, the husband or the kid comes in for the medical visit and then you try to do everything. But if you get out there and see what are the conditions they're really living in, what are really the barriers to delivering healthcare, making everything really patient centric and family centric. I think that is a really nice ideal of like something that we can get to. It doesn't have to be, people worry about like, what about payer systems and is that socialism and all these like silly things? It's like, no, you can have like a population. Kaiser's very profitable. Or Intermountain Health is like very much capitalistic, but taking a different viewpoint on like, kind of like Scandinavian countries about how they deliver their healthcare model. So you don't have to like conflate like the way you deliver your healthcare with your philosophies on economics, and what that means, or if that's political or not, right? You can just build out things that are different, but it also means that your payers have to recognize a different world. And I think I think that's really interesting. So it's kind of a fun. Thank you for asking that question, because it's a fun theoretical conversation to have. And I remember before leaving Kaiser Permanente, I kind of threw out the concept of like, what if we had virtual care children's hospitals? Because it's hard to build a children's hospital, and then we took care of like almost 1 million children, but where do you put one hospital? And if you put it one place, now do you make everyone have to drive to it? But what if you decentralize it, get it out there? I think those ideas like that are really interesting, and it is possible, extremely difficult, but it could be possible to build those things with the tools we have. There's no reason.
I think that's exciting, Tariq. If there's a Web 3.0, right, crypto, why not a Healthcare 3.0, decentralized, community-driven, accessible to anyone? I think that's an awesome vision, and I'm happy we have people like you trying to lead us in that direction. Tariq, I want to thank you so much for your time. dropping so much knowledge, your contributions, and gosh, I wish you so much luck in your life as an innovator, and appreciate you coming on the pod.
Chris, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and really enjoyed having this conversation and getting to talk about all these things. I think this is fun. And so, and hopefully, we'll be speaking more in the future or sharing ideas and crossing paths in the innovation world. So
I think absolutely. And I know a lot of startups that would love to talk to you. So yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you, Tariq.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to this podcast and being a part of this movement. This podcast is brought to you by Persimmon Health, an offering by Leapfrog Technology that's purpose-built to help innovators imagine, build, and scale digital health products. We're passionate about fixing healthcare and have worked on over 50 digital health products. If you want to share your story or want to work together, please shoot an email to hello@persimmonhealth.com. Thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.